Elijah and Elisha stand by the side of the Jordan River, looking at one another. And it's a tense moment because they know something is going to happen, but they don't know what it is. For a little while now, Elisha has been the mentee of Elijah. But it's about to be over because God is about to take Elijah. And they both know it. And they've been on this strangely circuitous route along the land. But at all these very particular auspicious places in Israel's history. Gilgal, where Joshua built an altar as the people went to the promised land. Jericho, where the walls fell as they entered the land. Bethel, back a long time ago, when Jacob had a vision of God ascending on a ladder and built an altar. And now they find themselves back at the Jordan River. And Elijah, he takes off his mantle, the mantle that covered his face when he met God on the mountain. The mantle he threw over Elijah's shoulders to call him to a prophetic career. He takes this mantle and he rolls it up in something that resembles maybe a staff. And he strikes the Jordan with it, and the waters part. It's a transition moment. Just like when Moses and his staff stood at the Red Sea and the people walked from slavery into freedom. Or when Joshua stood at the Jordan River and the waters parted and the people left their dry and dusty 40 years of desert living to go into the promised land flowing with milk and honey. It's a transition moment through the waters. And two men walk through it, but only one of them is going to come out the other side. And so they stand there and walk through the waters, and Elisha makes his request. Please, I would like to inherit a double portion of your spirit. It's not greed. It's the language used in the law for how sons inherit from fathers. And that's how Elisha sees his mentor, as his father in the prophetic ministry. And he needs a double portion because he's not sure how he's going to do it alone. And he needs a double portion because all of these other prophets scattered through Israel need to see him as their leader, as Elijah's successor. And he needs a double portion because King Ahab, who's in power, is, to say a minimum, an unpleasant fellow. And so he needs a double portion. But Elijah says, that's not mine to grant. And he looks at the face of this younger man. And he begins to reflect on his own ministry. A ministry that was often violent, slaughtering other prophets and bears that did things, and it was a lot. And he looks at the face of Elijah, and he has this kind of sixth sense that he is ready for it. And there's a compassion on his face that's different. And Elijah knows somehow that this ministry will be like his, but it'll be different. It'll be marked by a compassion. And it will be, by healings and miracles. And the people will return to the Lord under Elisha. And as he's having these musings, suddenly there's like a fire that comes. An indescribable moment where he's on this heavenly chariot. And he's heading for the clouds. And it's over as quickly as it starts. And he barely hears Elisha crying out, "Father, Father, chariots and the horsemen." And then there's Elisha by himself, staring up at the clouds, bereft and grief-filled and confused. Because now, where's the roadmap exactly? Where's he supposed to go from here? Who is he without Elijah? And he notices in that moment that Elijah's mantle has fallen to the ground. And he looks at it for a long moment, and he gingerly picks it up. It's a little more ragged than he might have imagined it to be, coarser fabric than he might have thought, but it's durable. There's a strength in it. And he holds it in his hands, and the grief and the frustration just fill him. He saw the chariots, he has this mantle. Is this a double portion? And he turns around, and there's the Jordan River. And it's running what seems to be maybe a little quickly. And he doesn't really want to get soaking wet. And so he thinks in frustration, are you going to split the waters for me? And he takes the mantle and he wads it up in a ball. And he puts all of his anger and his grief and his frustration into it. And he hurls it at the water and he says, where are you, God of Elijah? And the waters part. And it's a slow moment, kind of, as Elijah watches as they're blown back. And he puts the mantle on his shoulders. It feels a little heavy with the weight of its responsibility, but it fits. And he begins to take one step and then another and another, feeling the power of God through the parted waters, walking from what he's always known and loved into what is becoming, trusting that God is going with him, that he carries the mantle. And I think there are moments when we all find ourselves by a Jordan River of one form or another. These transitions that come into our lives, the kind that are unbidden. And we stand there feeling a lot like Elijah, looking at something of our former self that has and is passing away. That we can't be that any longer as much as we want to, because the transition is upon us. These transitions, like moving from child to adult, from young to middle age, moving from identifying as child to losing parents, or from being spouse or partner to by oneself through divorce or death or otherwise. Moving from healthy to less healthy. These transitions, they find us, they put us by the river, and we're not necessarily ready to let go of who we were, but it's going to be taken from us anyway. And so we ask for some kind of double portion, something to see us through. How will we be? Who will we be? And in those moments, we come face to face with what the core of ourselves really is. Kind of mantle of sorts. The places we don't look in our soul because we're too busy or we don't have the time or it might cause us heartache, but they become for us a kind of mantle in the transition. Something that might feel a little ragged, but it feels like it's us. Something we can gently cloak ourselves in. But it often feels like too much to leave the river. We don't know who we are, we don't have a roadmap, there's no real clarity, and we've lost so much. And so we wad up what we do have and we throw it at the sky and we say, you know what? Where in the world are you, God? And it's then usually that the waters part. It's the honest cry out to God about all the things that cause us grief and pain and heartache that allows God to part the waters. And there's a stepping through the waters, knowing that God goes with us. We don't have a roadmap, we don't have an answer. But we have the core of who we are and have always been. And we have the promise of a God who's going with us, that we are becoming. And so we step forward, one step at a time, trusting God's with us, trusting ourselves, carrying that mantle as we go. But I think, to this passage, at the risk of maybe some insider baseball, I think that this passage is also a perfect metaphor for the church. I don't just mean the cathedral, but it applies. But I think it's a great metaphor for where the Episcopal Church stands. That there are moments in the life of the church that we have stood by the sides of the Jordan. Major transition moment in the 1500s. Arguably, major transition moment right now. And the church that is becoming is this kind of Elijah that stares at the church that has been, the Elijah, and isn't really ready to take over yet. There's too much that we don't want to lose, too much that we're not ready to do, and there doesn't seem to be a roadmap or an answer. Now, some of them are offered. It's time for the Episcopal Church to let go of buildings and bishops, to put aside the liturgy, to craft some new language, and to move on. But that feels to me a lot like an Elisha who just stops watching the chariot go up to heaven. And there are others who say, no, it has been what it always will be, and if we change any of it, we lose all of it, and so we will not do anything. And that feels like an Elijah who never crosses the Jordan in the first place. And both of these perspectives seem to me to dishonor the most important part of this passage, which is the mantle. That there's a creative continuity in this story between Elijah and Elisha. They're not the same man, but they're called to a same sort of ministry. But the context changes. And so it is that the church that is becoming is not disconnected from what has been. There is certainly a mantle of continuity that happens. Question is how we wear the mantle. What is it? How does it fit our shoulders? And perhaps it is that the day of Elijah is passing. The church has a violent past. It's time to be honest about that. The Episcopal Church has been caught up, if you study the history of it, or if you came to our newcomers class, in quite a lot of navel-gazing over the years, complicit with slavery and a variety of other things that were culturally not so great. Maybe it's time to shed those. And maybe it's time to move into a future not unlike Elijah's that's more compassionate, one marked by healing and one marked by miracles, in which people's hearts return to the Lord. And there's a continuity between those, but they're different. So the church stands there. And we want to hold on with all that we have to Elijah, but it's passing away. And as it's carried off, we're hoping for a double portion because we'd like to inherit. We'd like to keep going in the forebears of our faith, and the mantle falls. The question is, when we pick it up, it might feel a little bit ragged. It might not feel like it's warm enough for the draft that's blowing. We might sometimes feel like wadding it up in a ball, chucking it at the waters, and saying, hey, anybody home? Like, what's going on? Where's the roadmap? Where are the resources? What's the answer, and how do we keep going? But it's always then that the waters part. And the question is whether we can fit the mantle on our shoulders, feel the responsibility of what has been, and yet step into something that is becoming, knowing that God is with us, knowing that the past accompanies us, but the future is different. And so I think we stand at the waters. It's an auspicious moment. And with the traditions of the past as a mantle on our shoulders, I hope we walk through the waters God has parted, releasing what has been that needs to go, blessing it, grateful for it, and stepping in to what is becoming with joy, with anticipation, and open-heartedness. Not just for the sake of ourselves. That's not my point. That's never my point. For the sake of a world that needs the compassion and the healing and the miraculous that the church has to offer. We carry the mantle. May we carry it well. May we carry it anew. And may we step into what's becoming, confident of God's creative future for us.